Okay.
And I think that almost all the players are here. So I want to convene this budget work session. And before I turn it over to the town manager, I do want to acknowledge that this will be the last budget review, the first of the last two budget review sessions where Council President Marnie Shaw will be participating. And I want to acknowledge how far we have come and to thank her for the incredible support and participation that she has had in creating a process that is sort of, I would assume, admired by other municipalities and so far and away better. When I first got on the council, we got some rudimentary document with no annotations on anything. I guess we probably got it the Thursday before it was introduced by the mayor. I've seen, as I've been going through the former mayor's files, I've seen a lot of these documents. And then there was really no involvement by the council. And then the Thursday before it's voted on, we would get a somehow revised copy, and no member of the public really ever commented on it. And I don't think any of us really knew what was in there. And just think where we are now. And, you know, Marnie recognized that all these years ago and you know, I had a lot of ideas, but if it wasn't for her support and active participation, we didn't have a budget committee. And the documents didn't really provide any information. So we've just come such a long way. And I don't know if Marnie wants to add anything to that, but this is your real legacy. I think we should think of a name. We should maybe call it the Marnie Shaw budget process and market it or something, copyright it. I don't know. Do you want to say anything before we start?
Oh, we don't have a lot of time, but I thank you for the kind words. And there were many people who were very helpful in getting us to this point. I especially appreciate
that's
the
true,
budget.
but if it wasn't for your support and leadership, it wouldn't have happened. So thank you. And now I will turn it over. I do want to welcome our budget committee led by an incredible chair, Phil Young, and we have Jonathan and Ann, and thank you. And now I will turn it over to our town manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just a reminder to everyone that this meeting is being recorded. I just confirmed. And so we will post it on the town's website and send out the link for anybody to watch after the fact. This is primarily a council work session, so I don't think that we will be taking public comments at this time. However, the budget is a collaborative process, so town residents should feel free to send any comments or questions to the town hall, and it will be part of the discussion. If somebody does join and I don't have the correct name or your name is not showing up, I'll send you a private message and ask that you identify yourself so we can have that for the record. And if for some reason somebody does make a comment, please do state your name and the street that you live on so that we have that for the record. If this meeting gets interrupted for whatever reason, we will immediately end it and I will send out a new link for us to rejoin via the town's communication channels. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Mr. Mayor.
Well, I think you usually lead us through this.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
So we'll
You and
just
I think
jump right into it.
And aren't we usually led also by our budget?
Yes,
I will
so,
defer to the council president to endorse how she wants us to proceed.
I think everybody's eager to hear the latest word from the budget committee about where we stand with revenues, because that affects our entire ability to do the budget. So maybe if Phil could kick this off.
Sure, I'd be happy to. You can hear me now, right, everybody? We're good?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Council President Marnie. I just have to start by saying that we're going to miss you terribly. It will not be the same. Anyways, thank you. Let me start by highlighting what Council President Marnie Shaw was just saying about the income tax revenues. As you're already aware, the council adopted an austerity budget because of the pandemic, and we really restrained expenditures a lot with the thought that revenues could fall precipitously because of the pandemic. We expected that fall to really happen in FY22, however. And for some, I have to say, mysterious reason, we're seeing quite a large drop in FY21. The number that we have forecast, I don't think we're going to be that far off of our forecast, and the fiscal year ends at the end of June, but the remaining distributions are pretty much linked to what's already happened. So the $860,000 of income tax revenue that we're forecasting for this fiscal year, that's a big drop compared to previous years. What I might do, just to give some perspective on the size of the number, is, Matt, can I share my screen for a moment?
I believe you should have that ability. Let me know if it's not giving you that option.
Okay, let's try this. Let me just get it ready for you. Okay, up here, and then share screen. And we're looking at the Excel. Share. Okay, so everybody can see this file now?
Yes.
Okay. So what I'm talking about is for FY21 end of year projection, we have 860,000. The amended budget had almost 1.2 million, and that compares to the FY20 audited figure of 1,246,000, so 1.246 million. So relative to FY20, 1 year ago, we're down almost $400,000. That's a significant chunk of change. And I bring that point up because for the proposed FY22 budget, I want to highlight the uncertainty of this figure that we have right now of 1.0 million. That forecast assumes a bounce back of 20% relative to the low base of FY21. If we don't get that bounce back, if instead we only saw, say, the normal historical trend of 3%, that would be a reduction in revenues of $146,000. I actually have that calculation over here on the side. That's how much less revenue we would have if income taxes grew by 3% instead of 20%. So the budget is very dependent on this single number, this forecast. Matt and the budget committee are looking into what's happening with that number, and we still don't have a good answer, but we are looking into it. For now, I think we just have to assume that it's real, and hope that there's a bounce back. And it's more than just a hope, because the economic news that we've been hearing is that the economy is coming back much more quickly than we had thought. And nobody's expecting a big downturn in FY22. We're just kind of surprised that given the strength of the economy in FY21, we've seen this happen, this reduction of income tax revenues. So we're looking into it. That's all I can tell you for now. Now, you may have some questions. I'll try to anticipate them about the stimulus money. It's public information that Somerset may get $1 million from the stimulus package. That was in a table that the Seventh State blog sent out. And we don't know, however, if that amount is final. We don't know what the strings may be on it. So for the time being, that is not in this budget. We're not counting on it. And
So can I just add one thing?
yes, Mr. Mayor.
So I inquired through Congressman Raskin's staff this weekend, and she told me, his chief of staff told me that the regs or whatever you want to call it for that COVID relief money are not out, and nobody knows what restrictions there will be.
Right. So we're not
He's
counting.
actually having a forum tonight from 6 to 7, where I think that question is going to be asked by a number of municipal leaders. So I just wanted to let you know, but hopefully that information is going to be available soon. So that's all I want to tell you. Sorry.
Okay. Thanks. So I think the prudent thing for now is to just not include it until we have more information. If it comes in, great. We'll get $1 million. And then I would think the best thing to do with that money is treat it as a one-time grant, because it's not going to be coming in year after year, and put it aside in both the mixture of the rainy day fund and the special capital fund, which we've so far been unable to fund, because we do have some big expenditures looming in the future. Just quickly, property tax revenues are assumed to grow by 1.5% in FY22, and then grow by 3% thereafter. What we've seen in the first 7 months of fiscal year 21 is a growth of about 1.3%. So we're just assuming a continued modest growth. And while the focus tonight is on FY22, and we don't need to deal with the 5-year forecast just yet, I would point out that based on the current numbers and trends and looming expenditures, the 5-year budget as it stands would not be sustainable. So that's an issue that we need to keep in the back of our minds. And the evidence for that not being sustainable is if I scroll all the way down to the bottom where we look at reserves. I mean, we still worked up some numbers for the 5 years. Down here at the bottom, you can see in row 348, what we call unencumbered reserves. Those are turning negative by FY24. And so we have a little bit of time. FY22 and FY23, we're not going to run out of money. Although it's running a little bit low in FY23 already, but then they become negative beyond that. So that means that we have to either cut back further on expenditures, maybe not do some of the capital expenditures that we have planned, or possibly raise property taxes. But I don't think we need to deal with that tonight, but I wanted to plant that in the back of your mind so you're aware of it. So that's my quick summary of where we stand. And then I would just like to turn it back over to Matt to start going through the budget line by line and take any council members' questions. Do you want me to stop sharing now, Matt? Or should I just keep it up and you can direct me where you want to show people?
I'll defer to Marnie on that question. Marnie, how would you like to proceed?
Why don't we stick with the screen being up? It may be easier for people to focus. And if that winds up not working, then council members can say, let's go back to the other.
Okay, so
I did not print it out, so I do need to have the screen up.
okay, let's keep it up and I'll try to follow along with Matt.
Okay. So, thank you, Phil. I think that was a great summary. The one thing I'll add is that we did see, for whatever reason, a 7.7% decline in income tax returns from 2009.
2019.
For 2019, excuse me, thank you. But as Phil suggested, that doesn't adequately explain such a precipitous drop in our income tax revenues. So we're
Decline, Matt.
still looking into that.
Matt, was that a statewide decline or the 7.7% drop?
No, that's just for Somerset.
All right.
What does that mean, that people stopped being required to file tax returns who lived in Somerset?
Well, that's part of the question that we're trying to answer. We did receive some information that I think a handful of the highest bracket of income folks did not file in Somerset, meaning they either moved away or they may not have cashed out for that tax year, some combination thereof. Just don't really know, don't have enough information to fully answer that question, I don't think.
Matt, if you want, I can pull up that file of Deborah's that shows the number of returns that are processed. And I think you can see there, it varies from year to year. So it's not totally stable, right?
Right.
Did Chevy Chase Village or did any of the comparable municipalities notice a drop in their revenues as well? Do you have any idea?
Ours was much steeper than other municipalities.
Okay.
We had the steepest of all of them.
Okay. Interesting.
That's why we suspect that there might be some sort of an accounting error, but we haven't been able to resolve that yet.
Okay.
You see here, by the way, in this line 44, it shows the number of returns processed for the year as a whole through December 31st. In 2013, it was 488, it dipped down to 470, then up to 525, down to 503. So it kind of bounces around. It fell by 5, the number of returns
Okay.
in 2019. That's the last year we have data for.
But if you see in the next line down,
Sorry.
the overall tax liability for the town of Somerset decreased by $900,000.
That's the 7.7 Matt was referring to percent.
So can I just ask a maybe stupid question? You know how we always have the notice in the newsletter that people are supposed to designate Somerset as their locality? I mean, does that truly affect the number of returns that get attributed to us, or is that just sort of a convenience for the state, for the comptroller?
My understanding from them is that that's more of a convenience thing, that they've figured it out, and that the returns are their computer system is able to figure it out by address and by zip code.
Yeah, I thought so. Okay.
Yeah, and we've given them a list, but I think a question that has been asked in the past is for taxpayers, like my tax return, the address that is put on it is my accountant's address. I don't know, that's just the way they do it. But, my tax return does say the box checked for Somerset, but I don't know how many other people, but we've given them all these every year. Isn't this right, Marnie? We give them like the names and addresses to the best of our ability.
I don't know if we do it every year, but after the comptroller's office made a lot of mistakes a few years ago, we gave them a file of addresses. I don't know if we've given them the file every year, but
So
They were
that's something that
supposed to
Matt
check.
might want to ask
Hmm.
if they have the updated, the last time we asked them that question, I believe they said that they had a very sophisticated system to make sure they capture all of our residents.
And by the way, Franny, this would only, that issue would not explain what happened in
Right.
fiscal year 2021, because that was in the past and it got corrected, and we have no reason to think that it suddenly got worse now.
Right. I just was curious. When you were talking about the number of returns filed, it reminded me of that.
Yeah,
I wondered if that was really meaningful, if that was a convenience. So,
Well, with that, I guess we can just jump right into it.
I have one question, and that is, and I guess this is for Phil or maybe for Matt. When you say you're looking into it, can you give us your gut feeling? I mean, we're putting together the budget. What should we rely on in putting together this budget for this next year?
well, I mean, Barbara, what we've done is we've sort of said, okay, we don't really know what this number is. We're not sure about it, but for the time being, we're gonna assume a pretty strong bounce back. And that's the 20% increase I mentioned before. So we think there's some sort of an issue, but the best we can do is just assume a strong bounce back. But I wanted to highlight the risk of that if it does only grow by 3%, we're out 146,000, for example.
So but you feel comfortable that we can rely on a pretty strong bounce back?
I feel comfortable, not so much that we can rely on the bounce back, but that if it doesn't happen, we have the rainy day fund to go to. So if we don't get that 146,000, we can draw down the rainy day fund. That's what it's for. If revenues don't live up to expectations, we can use that to finance our expenditures. And that buys us time to come up with some other policy action.
does it make sense instead to adopt a budget, but then look at it again in June or July and consider amending it?
Well, the good thing is that we're working on the issue, and we
Yeah.
haven't given up. So we're still in conversations with the comptroller staff, and maybe even by next week, if we're super lucky, we might have some more information. So let's wait and see. I mean, the issue with the addresses, I think that took months to
Right.
resolve.
Okay.
So I think we have to wait and see.
Yeah, I'm kind of more of the mind, similar to Franny. Do a very slim budget and then have a do-over session if the money turns up. But it seems like relying on it at this point seems a little, there's no reason to think that we should, or at least I haven't heard any reason to think that we should rely on it.
Right.
And why would we want to, that doesn't seem fiscally responsible for a council to spend money that we don't know if we have.
I mean, luckily we haven't been in this situation before, but just to go into the budgeting, assuming that we have the rainy day fund, is certainly not the philosophy we've used before. Anyway, I think, we can go through it.
Okay, I want to ask Marnie a question about this. So Marnie, the council passes the budget, and there's X dollar, and maybe Phil knows the answer. So there's X dollars in revenue. Then in July, we get unanticipated revenues. So we put that in, what do? We put that in a certain line, and then the council has to then move it around by vote after that? Is that how that works? I forgot.
I believe the budget, in order to do a budget amendment, it would need to be passed by a supermajority. So four out of the 5 council members would need to vote to change it when you're doing something more significant than just moving money between different line items, for
But
example.
we wouldn't know, because the thing is, we wouldn't know, if we were getting more money in July, we wouldn't know that we're going to be getting enough in March it's not like we get all of it at one time. So it's going to make it really difficult. But anyway, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and
Well, something-
I have to say also that, if the seat council members were going to remain the same, I myself would feel more comfortable moving forward with the budget committee's suggestion. But given the fact that 3 council members will be leaving the council, I really wouldn't want to leave 3 brand new council members and then 2 council members with a total of 3 years of experience with a budget that couldn't be balanced, that had to rely on the rainy day fund. That just seems irresponsible to me. That's my knee-jerk reaction.
Well, Barbara, I think you raise a good point, and we had the same discussion amongst the budget committee members. So I'm certainly not disagreeing with you. And the other option would be you put in a much lower income tax revenue and consider postponing, for example, the street repaving that's going to cost $225,000 in fiscal year 22. You could push that off another year saying, we don't have that. Now, the other alternative is if the revenue doesn't show up, you could postpone the street repaving anyways, but maybe it's better to do it right up front. And then, as you say, if the revenue does come in, we might be able to go ahead with it, but those things have a lead time. So it might get delayed even if the revenue did come in.
Another thing that will complicate getting good estimates is the comptroller announced that the state income tax won't be due till July. So although we may get the same amount of money, the timing of it may be later. And as I understand it, the IRS isn't going to be in front of the Congress this week. And one of the big questions is, will they be giving US taxpayers an extension?
Right.
Because of all the new forms and things. So
First of all, to repeat Jeffrey's point, we will actually won't know how good our revenues are next year until about this time next year, is what it boils down to.
Yeah.
I mean, in other words, we know how bad they are now, only at this time this year. So, but in other words, for budget planning, we've really got to go with something, is what it comes down to. And we hashed this over, and I particularly hashed this over. I put Matt through it and Phil through it. Where did you come up with 20% from? That was it. I asked that question. And the answer is there is no strong basis for doing it, but it takes us back about halfway to where we were in fiscal year 20. That's what it does.
Yeah, notice that number of 1 million is still lower than the 1.2 million in FY20.
Right, it's basically splits the difference.
And it just economically, from all the news that we've heard, it's so hard to understand that 860,000.
Yeah.
So we felt like we were kind of edging towards the bounce back, but I can equally see an argument for being more conservative and saying, okay, we can't count on that. Take 3% over the 860 and maybe hold off on the street repaving for another year. That's a decision the council has to make.
Phil, I know that you you have to walk us through this every year, and usually it's at my request, but the rainy day fund seems to me that we would have to, if I recall, we would have to actually spend the money over the budget before we could dip into it. So we would, it may be that we don't get into those rainy day funds because they're, typically each year we have categories where we don't manage to spend everything that we've budgeted. I don't have any sense of the scale of that on on most years. Maybe you and the budget committee have an understanding of kind of where we typically come out in terms of actual spending, what percentage we, I'm sure it's in here. I just can't find the number, but we wouldn't get into the rainy day fund money until we had actually spent the money in our budget. And that would mean carrying through on a lot of things that we typically don't actually spend all the money on.
I mean, that's true. We're conservative in our forecast of expenditures to the extent that they're usually higher than they end up being.
Yeah,
We usually underperform on the expenditure side.
right.
But the way the rainy day fund is written, and we sent around a copy of the resolution, anticipating your question.
My annual question.
What it says here, I mean, I think the key sentence is, the town shall only use the rainy day fund to supplement the town budget when both, one, the town's actual revenues for a single fiscal year are insufficient to pay for the town's budgeted expenditures for that same year.
Yeah.
And when no other reserve funds are available.
Right.
So if you did have a major shortfall in revenues of 200,000, you might need to use the rainy day fund. I think one slight problem with the language is just that you'd have to use all your unencumbered reserves first, but we could tweak that.
Right. One other point is that the rainy day fund is meant to be used when we have a rainy day. You know, I mean, that's.
Yeah,
I guess Phil, you're talking about taking out the street repaving and.
One example, something would have to be taken out, right? If you're going to cut $146,000 from your revenues, you've got to cut somewhere else.
Right, but I understand that. And I guess my question then for Matt is if he and Doug have taken a look, I know there are two streets that I've pointed out to them, Surrey Street and Warwick. And if, before we take it out, if Matt, you might want to have someone come in, a consultant come in to see if they actually, if it makes sense to put off the paving. To me, they look like they're in pretty bad shape. And if we go through another bad winter with them, I'm not sure how they'll end up. But again, that's just to my eye. I know nothing. And I wonder, Matt, if you've done that.
You know, I've been more approaching it in terms of these need to be done, so how should we prioritize them, as opposed to, well, what if we don't? So I'll have a conversation with Doug about that, and then maybe look into if we should bring in somebody who has specific expertise in that area to give us some thoughts.
can I throw out an idea and see what people think? I know Matt's already put a lot of work into this, and I think we do usually want to spend time going line by line, but I wonder if it's useful at all to think about looking at some of our proposed expenditures and talking about what range of expenditures we might be comfortable with. I mean, maybe it may be less relevant for things that we have contracts for, like the trash company. I mean, that's going to be an amount that we are obligated to pay. But when we get into some of the more discretionary areas, maybe we could talk about, you know, what is the range that we would be willing to spend? What's the high end? What's, you know, how much we'd be willing to give up on categories so that we could reduce our total expenditures and get a little more comfortable without taking out, you know, big priorities like the road. I mean, taking out the road work would be sort of an easy solution. But if we are going to go line by line, maybe we can see how much we'd be willing to spend less on given categories as we go along, and see if we can build together a net savings that would get us more comfortable with the assumption that's placed in the income tax revenue box up here. So that, you know, when we meet a week from now, maybe we'll have more information about that number, and maybe our budgeted numbers will be fine. But if a week from now we get confirmation that in fact our number is that much lower, we've already done the fine tooth comb work of figuring out what we'd be willing to go down to. And maybe we can find enough money to save through the process so that we can keep one of the two road building projects in the budget without scrapping the whole idea. Because, you know, maybe in fact all we need to do is to only repair one of the two roads in the coming year, and we could figure out which one needs it most, but we'd still be able to move forward with that work if we could find some savings in other categories.
So,
Anyway,
Franny,
It's a lot more work, but
to your point, Franny, what we could do tonight is we can go through this line by line, and try to make sure that what we end up with at the end of the day, if you look down here at the very bottom of the budget, we have unencumbered reserves right now of 190,000,
mhm,
just under 200,000.
mhm.
That's where we would, I think we should try to end up, no matter what we do above the line with revenues and expenditures. If we cut revenues by 146,000, we should try to find similar cuts so we stick to a number close to that 190,000. And
Okay.
we can do it on the fly right now because I'm sharing my screen, and we can work on this file as we go through it and keep looking at what's happening to unencumbered reserves.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense to me. I mean, I know it slows things down, but maybe,
No, it doesn't slow
you
things
know,
down.
usually when we go through this, my experience has been that when we aren't sure how much something is going to cost, we sort of generously round up, you know, and just to have enough cushion, you know, and that's usually good and it usually helps us. But then we get into this situation where we don't end up spending what we budgeted because we estimate higher just to be comfortable.
So what's the consensus then? Should we put in the 3% growth and then start going through it line by line, looking for ways to cut?
I don't know. Maybe Robin has a different view.
I do. I mean, Marnie can echo these comments because we started looking at our budget back, I don't know, Marnie, 12 years ago now, I don't know. But one of the things that we noticed is how unstable our budget is. It goes up and down like a yo-yo. And it does. We've actually been more stable in very recent years than in past years historically. So in the past, we've had bad years followed by very good years, followed by bad years, followed by very good years. It goes literally up and down like a yo-yo. And in that context, I was very happy when Phil suggested a rainy day fund because that's exactly the kind of thing that helps you even out your budget when you have a yo-yo budget.
Mm-hmm.
We are probably in one of those bottom of the yo-yo swings at the moment. And I think it is conservative to say split the difference from the high point for next year because we're probably going to go up the following year. Historically, that has been the pattern. With all that said, I'm quite happy to go around looking for further savings, not being certain that we are going to see a 20% increase. And I support that, but I don't think we should use a 3% increase. That would lead to cuts beyond where we're comfortable. We've been through this on Friday already, so we have some
I
knowledge.
see. Okay. I figured you would have already done it in fine tooth comb, but you know, I don't know whether I agree with Barbara that we should start out assuming we're not going to get any bump, because I think that does mean we end up having to do quite a lot of work either 10 days from now or whatever it is, or else, you know, 2 months from now or something. So, but using some kind of conservative estimate makes sense to me. So I'm okay with starting from the point that's as written.
My only other concern is, at least as far as my memory serves me, every year we seem to run into some significant unexpected expenses with the pool. And the
True.
pool is now another year older. And we have heard that the pool itself is on its last legs. So my concern, and again, I'm obviously willing to, I want to hear what other people have to say, but I just don't want to leave a new council with a pool that's about to open and the pool company coming and saying, you need X number of dollars for this repair. And we've already in the budget earmarked the rainy day fund for other projects. I myself don't feel comfortable with that, but I don't have to agree with all of you. You know, I can have my own, I'm very conservative on the budget and I'm very comfortable being conservative on the budget. So if I don't agree with you,
Yeah.
that's okay. You know, I'm okay sitting where I'm sitting. And if you all feel that it's like a yo-yo and it will come back next year, that's okay. But that's not okay for me. I don't feel good about that.
Can I just,
Barbara, I don't know if you noticed that the budget, proposed budget has $65,000 in for the pool deck repair. That's not replacing the pool, but
Yes,
there's
but that-
actually money in the budget to do some significant investment in the pool next year
And that's in the pool deck, though. I'm talking about the pool itself.
itself. Right.
Yeah.
well, maybe the pool is not an area to be particularly conservative in. Maybe there are other categories where we have to be a little more conservative in comparison. Just to cover that. But anyway, maybe it makes sense just to go through it as written. And then if we have to go back up to the top and adjust the income tax figure next week, we will. I mean, or maybe we have to have a third budget session if we have to sort of essentially start over.
Well, and the other thing is in the past, when we've gotten additional information after the mayor has introduced the budget at the April meeting, we've amended the budget
Yeah.
that was introduced in between the April meeting and the May meeting.
Right. That makes sense. I don't know if I advanced the ball at all with any of that, but we can go through it now, I guess.
And again, I hope I'm wrong. I hope we get good news in about a week and that I feel more comfortable. But again, I feel very comfortable not sharing other people's feelings. That's on this, you know.
Mhm.
Okay, so where do we go from here?
Well, I think we should take a look at the remaining part of the income and see if anybody has questions there and then move over to the expenditures. I'm not sure there's a whole lot more to talk about, but maybe there are some questions.
Well, one thing I noted here is that annually we get a memo from the Department of Assessments and Taxation. They do a calculation for what they call the constant yield tax rate for property taxes, which is the one tax rate that Somerset has the authority to change. And they've actually suggested raising our property tax slightly from 10 cents per $100 of assessable value to, I think it was 10.2 cents per $100 of assessable value.
I've never seen them make that kind of recommendation, I think. That's unusual.
Yeah, very, very small. They'd say for the upcoming tax year, the assessable base of some taxing authorities has decreased. Therefore, the constant yield tax rate for those jurisdictions will actually be higher than the real property tax rate for the current year.
I think that happened last year in Somerset. Wasn't our total property tax lower than the prior year?
That's right. That's right.
So that's where that's coming from.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, 1/5 of a cent per $100 may.
It'll get us a cup of coffee at Starbucks. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So I don't know if it's even worth really having a conversation over, but I did want to note that for you. Would you like me to just go down the incomes quickly and
I think it's more efficient for people to raise questions than for you to
Okay.
describe things, since people have been through
Yeah,
those categories before, so if there are questions, that would be.
A question?
Page 1, does anybody have questions beyond what we've been talking about?
Just on the swimming pool, guest fees. I'm just wondering what assumption you guys used. Did you use the assumption that we were keeping the pool open through October, or did you assume that we were closing in at the end of September?
well, the proposed fees are basically for, if we were opening up for I went back to our old budgeted amount for that. We may want to zero that out
Mhm.
if we're not going to have guests at the pool this year again.
I mean, I think we might want to, this is an area where yeah, it's not clear that we're gonna be able to have as many guests. There might still be headcount limits and stuff like that.
Or have it, thinking that May, June of 2022 is still this upcoming fiscal year, and hopefully,
Mm,
God willing, we'll
right,
be back to
normal.
capacity.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I don't feel strongly about that. I just had the question about your assumption. I'm okay leaving it as written if you want.
Any other questions on the first page? I did have a couple of people from water aerobics tell me this week that they did not wind up having much collected when they took water aerobics this year. I don't know anything about that, but that's what they said.
Wait, I don't understand your question, Marnie.
A couple of people who took water aerobics who tried to pay for the class
Yeah,
said that they didn't wind up having much taken away from their account to pay for the class. So, but it's not a big category. I think maybe with our new software system
Yeah, I'll make sure that everything got
in
transferred over
place, everything
correctly.
should be working better.
Couldn't charge.
Moving, so are we done with page 1?
Barney,
So
not
page-
everybody has a printout, so you might want to refer to rows, the numbers.
Okay, so the last item on that page is pool fees, page number 34. So page 2 starts with line 35, the tennis court fees. And then then it's a question of just going down. The last line in revenues is 67. So do people have questions about any of these other sources of income?
Well, I mean, one general point, that is, if our revenues from income tax are declining, we might want to think about not just property taxes, but increases in fees across the board.
You know, Robin, I'm not hearing you very well. Can you speak a little more clearly?
Sure, I'll get closer to the microphone too.
That's perfect.
If our income tax revenue is going down, we might want to think about increases in fees across the board as another source of revenue for us.
So is there anything else people want to talk about in revenues? I guess one point we had at the work session was the question of what to say to the pool committee about whether we could look at opening the pool for the first 2 weeks in May. I think where the council was then was wanting to get a picture of where the revenues were before asking Matt to develop careful cost estimates for how much it would cost to open the pool for 2 weeks early. Does anybody have any thoughts?
Can we wait a week? I mean, it seems like if we think we might have better information even in a week, I guess why not wait?
Well, the one issue, Franny, is the decision needs to be made at the April council meeting. So there would need to be some way of, after waiting for a week, coming to some conclusion about what to do. Because the pool company needs, to know ahead of time, at least, at the April meeting. That's only, I think our meeting is what, April 5th? That's like 25 days before the pool would open if we were going to go ahead.
I mean, I've got two thoughts. One is that we don't have the money in our regular budget for it. And the other one is that we're getting $1 million in COVID relief funds, and they, in fact, opening the pool 2 weeks early may qualify for that, because the idea is that I heard from Ann on Friday, it's to give the kids who've been cooped up at home more outside activities, basically to compensate for their losses during the pandemic. And so it may be eligible for those funds, and that might be a way we can pay for it. That's all.
Matt,
Do we know if we do qualify for the $1 million, is that given in a lump sum in 1 year, or is that over a few years that we would collect that? Do we have any information on that?
Nothing.
The only information I have is I think they had talked about it in two tranches of money. Now I don't know if that means one this upcoming year and then a year later, or if it means 3 months from now and then 3 months from then, or what it means. But they did intimate that it was two different tranches of money.
in my
This
view,
is Steve. If I could just,
go ahead.
for folks from the reference material, it's about 1.06 million allocated by legislation to the town of Somerset, comes in two tranches. The first to be distributed by Treasury within 60 days. The second tranche, the second half, 1 year later. So we'd only be looking at one half in each fiscal year. And there are significant restrictions on how that money can be used. Although politicians have indicated that the objective is to get the money out there. So I think there's some expectation of flexibility or leniency in applications of those restrictions.
Steve,
And obviously more to follow.
Steve, can you help us with that a little? Do you know of any of the restrictions? Do you have any more detail on that?
I forwarded,
Yeah, I saw
people
that.
probably busy on the Zoom. I was multitasking, I'm afraid. I sent an email to everyone with I just sent it like a half an hour ago with the reference material from Senator Cardin. And it identifies the 3 different categories of using it. But basically it's, to recoup expenses for exceptional expenses for personnel. Like we had medical personnel that were part of our town, and we had to pay them extra during this period. We could recoup some of those funds. If we lost tourism because of COVID, we could recoup some of those funds, or we use these funds for water, sewer, or broadband improvements. There's that third category that we might be able to use, but that's not going to help in terms of general budget.
Thank you, Steve.
Yep.
Well,
I just-
but actually, we don't, I saw that, Steve, but that doesn't really clarify it because.
Oh, absolutely. It's still vague, still uncertain.
So let's keep hoping.
From my point of view, it's maybe not easier is not the right word, but it makes more sense to plan as if we can open May 1st and then say, no, we're not going to open May 1st. Now it's May 15th. I mean, obviously not from like the kids' point of view, but I'm just saying, like, in terms of finding out from American pool, what they would need and sort of voting and whatever else we need to do. I wonder if it makes sense to carry out the steps that we would need to do in order to make it happen. And then if we get, some information that we just don't have the money for it, then we could say we're sticking with our original plan of May 15th. But trying to ramp it up quickly, if we wait for information might be more difficult. Just a thought.
Which kind of information are you talking about? Are you talking about the federal regs? Or are you talking about how much it would cost the town to open 2 weeks early?
Well, I know that the money is not in our budget right now, but we do have some money, available. And if we decided we wanted to spend it in fiscal year 2021 or 2021 that we're in right now for this purpose, I don't know whether we could do it or not. Maybe you're saying that we can't do it, or are you saying that we can only do it if we get money from the federal government? I'm not sure if I'm really clear on what we're waiting for, but I just think if we're waiting for something, maybe we need to find out what the steps are in order to make it happen. And if we find out it's impossible, then we say, sorry, it's impossible.
I think at the work session, the guidance from the council was that we would try and get a sense today of whether there might be enough fiscal 21 money to go ahead. And if so, then Matt would try and find out how much it would actually cost, because we don't exactly know how much money we might have this fiscal year. And so he was going to try and find out from American Pool how much that would cost. He was going to look at the town expenditures on heating the pool and some of the contracts that would need to be extended to get a better idea of what the total cost to the town might be.
Yeah, I would be very interested in those numbers. I think it would be worthwhile for us to look at those numbers to see exactly how much it would cost to open the pool 2 weeks early.
So Marnie, just so I understand what you're saying, do you think there is still money in our current budget somewhere for this? And it's just a question of, what is the question then in terms of the money? I understand we don't know how much it will cost yet, but are you saying that you're not sure if we have money available to us right now, or that we're waiting to find out what the federal Recovery Act money might be?
This was never a question for me about the federal recovery
Okay,
money, because
okay.
I don't think we're going to know that by May 1st. No, it was more, I think the council said, we don't want to have our town manager spend a lot of time putting cost figures together if we don't even think it's feasible to come up with money. I'm hearing people say it might be feasible.
Oh, I'm not saying that based on dollars. I'm just trying to understand what our process is.
Well, I'm just describing what the council came.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
How is it different today than when we were at our work session last Thursday?
Because we're talking, I think that the budget was not, people didn't have all of this data in front of them. And so we were waiting for tonight to take a look at where we are.
But if I can weigh in with a few thoughts. First off, just to confirm what Marnie was saying, the federal funds, if we can tap them, could not be used to the pool and should not be considered as part of the budget in any way.
Right.
If it comes, we'll figure out, we should have a special meeting and then address it.
Okay.
But my understanding is we need to carefully review this budget, with a finely sharpened pencil, so to speak, and cut expenditures. I can't even imagine why we're talking about adding expenditures to increase the pool season. It just seems irresponsible at this point and a waste of Matt's time.
For me, Steve, it's because the money that we're looking for, and I understand, spending money. I get what you're saying, but we're talking to Matt about if if there is money from this current budget cycle. It's not for the budget we're going to approve, it's from this current budget cycle that I remember like there was $10,000 in for the garage, and I don't even know what that was for, but I know we didn't spend it. And I think there was another $5,000, I can't remember the line item, again, for this fiscal year that we didn't spend. So I completely agree with you that we have to be very, very careful. But my recollection is from looking at this year's budget, our current budget, that there was money that we just didn't spend that we thought we would spend, and obviously we're not going to spend. So that's where I'm coming from. It's not, I'm totally on the same page as you for next year's budget. But Matt, maybe you can clarify that.
Thank you.
Wasn't there $10,000 for the garage? And then there was another, I can't remember, $5,000 for another project. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, just generally speaking, I mean, I think there's sort of two different questions. And one is, can we find the money to move it around? The answer to that, broadly speaking, is yes. You know, we put in a part of the reason we see, and I think I made a note in my email to the council, part of the reason we see declining reserves is because we put in a lot of money into budget contingency, and we hardly ever spend all of that money every year. So in terms of being able to shift money around, we could. The other question is, can we afford to do that? That might be a different question.
Okay.
Right.
I mean, look, we have revenues this year that are well below the austerity budget that we set for this year. That is where we are. And how can we then justify expenses that are significantly beyond the austerity budget?
I guess I'm just interested in the number. I would be curious to know from Matt what number we are talking about. Matt, I don't know how big a project is that for you to figure out how much it would cost to.
Well, I sent them an email. I mean, the biggest cost is going to be just the added management costs. And then there is going to be some costs in terms of gas for the utilities and keeping the pool house lights on, things like that. But the largest cost is just going to be the management fees, paying to have somebody supervise the pool, lifeguard there, etc. You know, we were quoted $75,000 or so for the entire thing. I asked them to please break it down for us. I have not received a response yet, but you know, if you're considering it tonight, it might make sense to just estimate and say 25,000 to open it early, 50,000 to keep it open late, just for ballpark numbers and to think about it.
You haven't put that 50,000 in or not, or did you put it into the budget that we're looking at?
I did not at this time because I didn't want to. Yeah, I guess either way is sort of presumptuous on some level, but I didn't. No, to answer your question.
I just, you know, May 1st to me, I just don't think that other pools are going to be opening. I don't know. To me, it seems like a lot of money for potentially a very low turnout of swimmers, and I don't know. I mean, even with a heated pool, swimming outdoors in the first 2 weeks of May is really risky. It could be, the weather could be anything.
I hear you, but the only thing that comes to mind for me is when I was walking Sydney, it just so happened today. It was in the morning when school was opening for the first day, and in the afternoon when parents were going to pick up their kids. There was so much happiness.
Yeah, I know.
Parents and children alike to be able to go to school. This is
Yeah.
such a different year. And I agree with you. The weather could be terrible and it could
Yeah.
be freezing. But even so, it still makes me want to think that if we could add a little more joy
Yeah.
to the lives of the kids in this neighborhood for this first 2 weeks
Yeah.
of, I'm just saying I would be interested. I hear Matt's estimate. I'm hoping that's a high estimate, and I would just be interested in hearing the number before making a decision, because the kids have had such a hard year, and to see the happiness on kids, they could go to school, and the parents, and if depending on how much it would cost, I might buy into that happiness to open up the pool 2 weeks early.
I just mentioned a number. I just wanted to give a bottom line number because I think this part is missing in the conversation. To give you some perspective on whether we can afford it or not. No opinion, but if you look at these numbers for our FY21 projection relative to the budget, we're down about $344,000. Okay, that's the total loss relative to the budget. Now, that was offset by lower expenditures because on net, if we scroll down to the very bottom, you can see that unencumbered reserves here in row 348 are about $240,000 less than we had budgeted. So even though revenues fell by 340, unencumbered reserves only fell by 240. That means that we found savings on the expenditure side of about $100,000. But we're still at a point where we're projecting our end year unencumbered reserves to be that much less than we had budgeted.
Some of those expenditures were not even decisions we made. I mean, it was things that didn't happen.
Correct.
They couldn't happen. So,
Yep. Yep. I'm just giving you the bottom line net figure.
right.
Listening to all of this, it sounds like Matt should collect data for cost data for the first 2 weeks of May. And if we're not looking to add spending for the next fiscal year, then I wonder whether we want to add October, which is not currently in that budget.
Yeah.
It may be more important to the kids to have the May time than the October time.
But
But that's something we can think about.
But we could also adopt a budget, and then over the summer, if we discovered that there was a mistake, we could amend the budget to allow for the pools to stay open in October if that's where we felt like we could spend money.
Yeah, and that's how we've, I think, done it in the past. We have made a decision later in the summer about whether or not to open the pool.
Yeah.
Longer. Okay,
I'm good with that.
so Matt, you feel like you've got your marching orders?
Yes, yep.
Okay.
I'll have that for you guys.
So is there anything else people want to talk about on the revenue side, or can we move over to the cost side, expenditures?
I think Ann Bolton might have wanted to raise a point.
Okay,
Hi, all. I wasn't sure if I'm allowed to speak, so I've just been
of
listening.
course you are.
Okay, great. I just wanted to say that I don't know, I definitely think the May timeline is much more important than the October, because I think the world will feel very different in the October, just in terms of your consideration there. I would also say that my son has been swimming throughout the winter in outdoor pools. the whole year. They've not stopped. So anybody who's doing year-round swimming has been swimming in outdoor pools. So I don't see that as a deterrent. However, I do think that if the county maintains a lot of restrictions, that may affect how useful it is to have the pool open any earlier. And then I'll make one final point, which is that I do think having an understanding about whether there's a structural change in our tax revenue or if this is an error is critically important, because when we looked at the income tax collection of our neighbors in Chevy Chase, to me, it was pretty dramatic, ours relative to theirs. So I think I kind of want to stress that, because we looked really out of sorts compared to our neighbors. So it doesn't make sense to me that we had, somehow everybody in Somerset was economically more affected or delayed tax, submission or whatever. So those were just the points I wanted to add.
So Anne, I guess so is the bottom line for you that you feel it's an error? Where do you come out?
Well, I mean, to me, the only thing that seems logical is that it is an error, because the rest of it, I mean, Phil even ran some numbers of, let's assume if we lost some high net worth individuals, or if you took a hit in high net worth, because I mean, we don't have that many households. So let's say you lost somebody at the upper end, none of it made sense when he modeled that out. And to me, that was very instructive. So, unless there's something other structural reason that I can't think of right now, like, we have a high percentage of people who live here who maybe, get discretionary income or bonuses that didn't happen or whatever. I mean, it just doesn't seem logical based on just looking at the data and comparing it to other municipalities.
Right.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Anything else people want to say about the revenue side?
No.
Well, maybe we could move over to expenditures.
Are we going to go line by line here, or do we just raise questions as we go?
Well, I think the first big chunk is around personnel. So I don't know whether you want to do that.
Well, I didn't know whether this was the right forum or not to ask Matt for a little more clarity on his proposal for the Public Works Director. I just want to make sure I'm understanding it properly, that you're basically planning to hire somebody different. Is that correct? Or just change the title of the people we have working? What's the
Well, Enrique is retiring at the end of this fiscal year.
yeah.
And so we will need, right now, Enrique has served as a foreman, so as sort of the lead maintenance person.
Right.
And so in filling that role, I would like to expand the duties and responsibilities to also cover some of the infrastructure things that I talked about.
Okay.
So to take on some of the responsibilities that I think Larry Plummer did for the town in terms of monitoring and helping to plan out things like replacement of signage, schedule for that, helping to assess roads, curbs, gutters, sidewalks, any of the other smaller maintenance projects that go along, and also continuing to help with planning and planting of the gardens and public spaces, things like that.
That makes more sense to me. So, but you weren't talking about having that person do permit review work.
No, the only thing I thought is that they would help more with the code enforcement side.
Okay.
So that in a lot of ways is not just for building permits, but also is useful in terms of fence permits, driveways, driveway aprons, some of the smaller,
Okay,
those big permits that
Makes
come
sense
through
to me.
the town.
thank you.
And Matt, on this, you're showing a cost increase here in future years, but you actually are saying there'll be savings elsewhere in the budget because of the expanded duties of this role. Is that right?
Yes. So my goal is that, and how I foresee it is that exactly as you've described, is that we can phase out a contracted code enforcement position,
Mhm.
and also relieve Doug of some of that code enforcement work that he's been doing right now, so that he can more just focus on the review as it pertains to the code and the plans in front of him. It's not really a great use of town funds anyway to have him, be
Mhm.
paid $100 an hour to do code enforcement work
Okay.
anyway.
Matt, I have a question. I have to assume that because that you've talked to Enrique and Jose and Tomas, and they feel that having two people in the field for much of the time is sufficient. Because it sounds like the person that you're planning to hire, and as you called the person a director, is not really in the field much. And I know that with Enrique, I know that he takes a month off, as you know too, and then there are just two people in the field. And so if there are only two people in the field and one person goes away, that leaves one person taking care of the grounds for the entire town. And I just wonder if you've talked with them, with your staff about that, and if they feel that that's sufficient, because Enrique is, I think he supervises, for example, when they put in the garbage cans or the poop containers, he's the one telling them and doing the harder work, the more
Yeah.
skilled work.
Right.
And I don't know that a director would see that as part of the job. And that is the appearance of the town, and having another high level person, and then many days leaving only one person to take care of the town, that to me, that seems insufficient. And I wonder if the duties that you're looking to fill should be wrapped into a different position rather than that one.
Yeah, I thank you for your comments about that. And I did see you had sent me an email about it. And in terms of the title, I think you bring up some really good points. That's something maybe I need to think about more, because I wasn't envisioning it as somebody working from the office who is only directing them. I still envisioned a hands-on element to this job. And for example, Larry worked here 3 days a week. And so I was thinking more in terms of a 50-50 split, give or take, in terms of the work, specifically doing maintenance work, like putting, planting, mulching, the mowing, those types of projects, versus the other things that I talked about, the evaluation of infrastructure and code enforcement. And that was part of the reason why you see a bump in here as well, is because I would like to have the public works the public works crew work 40 hours a week as opposed to 50 hours a week. And so in terms of the number of man hours, so to speak, per week that's dedicated to these projects, is you're not necessarily taking away from it.
Have you talked with Jose and Tomas? I believe they have other jobs outside of their positions here. And are they able to work 40 hours a week? Have you had that discussion with each of them? And are they available to you for that extra time? And my other comment is that and this is again, just a comment, that rather than hiring a director, I would ask that you consider hiring a foreman. And then if the person did well as a foreman, as you added duties, then consider making that person a manager. And then if they
Yeah.
continue to succeed at that point, in a few years down the road, they could be a director. But I think we need 3 people in the field.
I had sort of, I think we had talked about that in an email as well as a possibility, especially in light of previous conversation that we were having about, well, what might we be able to put off this year until we have a better evaluation of our budget, to not immediately pile on these new responsibilities, but take a year, let the person slide into the role, advertise the job with that in mind, that they might take on these responsibilities down the road, but sort of put off the overhaul, if that makes sense. You know, if the council doesn't feel comfortable with it at this time, or would like to see a trial period, as you said, to make sure that it works. That's certainly a possibility. Yeah.
Have you talked with Jose and Tomas? Are they available to work 40 hours? Because that's a critical piece of this puzzle.
Yeah, it's just a matter of their schedule would still be morning to earlier afternoon, as opposed to they wouldn't be working, 9 to 5 shifts. They would have.
Let me just add that they don't work, and they're both working independently now. They don't, the job they held at that restaurant has been eliminated. So they're private contractors now, and I think they have flexibility.
Yeah, I guess I would just ask that you confirm that. I thought that they might have worked for another.
I've talked to Jose, and I'm not really sure about.
They primarily actually work on the weekends for their other job, which is landscaping and maintenance stuff.
They have their own business. Like
I think
Enrique.
if the person you were hiring has the right skill set, it makes a lot of sense for that person to be involved in code enforcement, because currently the crew drives around on every street every day, and they are looking at things. They could look at more things if they had the right skill set. So I think that would be a big improvement for us.
Well, I've sort of thought about that, and even the fact that they repaint some of the markings on the street and things like that. That it would be good to make sure that we have somebody that can really has a background in that and can make recommendations on how to improve it if needed, and really knows what they're doing and has knowledge in that, because Enrique has a tremendous amount of knowledge and a lot of institutional knowledge about the town that will be lost. So I do think it's important to get the right person with the right skill set, the right knowledge into that place as well.
So how much of a bump is that you're looking at now, Matt?
Well, right now Enrique is at about $25 an hour. So it would be a bump. in addition to being 40 hours a week as opposed to 35.
You were thinking about bumping the hourly rate, I'm sorry, $35 an hour? Or no?
Yeah, that was based on a sort of preliminary look on what public works directors were making, but maybe to Barbara's point, that might not be 100% the most appropriate title either. So I could certainly, I can flag that number and come back to you with a little bit more research on, manager title, what that might be. And
It's a very unusual job. I mean, you might be able to find the right person, but as I'm listening to the discussion, thinking about somebody who's out planting trees some of the days and is more of a manager the other days, it's kind of an unusual combination.
yeah, that's true.
Do they have that type of person in other towns, Matt?
Well, I think that when you're looking at, there is public works staff and a public works director in certain departments at different municipalities. I think it would be necessarily a little bit different because of our size. There is a little bit of a juggling of duties and a little bit broader description of things, as opposed to, if you look at the city of Tacoma Park, for instance, not that they're the best comparison to Somerset size-wise, but they do have a public works department, and they have a crew that works on infrastructure, and then they have a crew that works on their parks and does planting, and they're sort of separated out. And so this would be sorry, go ahead.
What about Martin's Additions?
Well, they contract out everything.
Oh, interesting.
And in addition, they don't really have the public space that we do, which is why Somerset has a maintenance staff in the first place, is because it's just more efficient that way. They have a couple dead ends and one little tiny park at one corner of the street that they're responsible for, and that's really it. And so they don't have any problem hiring a contractor and paying them a couple $100 a month, and that does the trick.
Matt, the higher pay that you're offering Public Works Director really is in return for the expanded duties that you see in this position. That in fact is generating savings for us because those duties are no longer being contracted out. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. And for example, right now we are paying a contracted code enforcement officer $60 an hour, and our current contractor is raising his rates to $75 an hour next year. So to answer your question, yes.
So do you think you need for this next fiscal year, I think you have in here for the code enforcement officer, how much do you have? You have I can't find it right now, but what did you
that
have?
is
$1,000 or something? What did you have?
I have it. So that is it's line 108 or 109, excuse me. I have $12,000 in there, and then zeroing it out after this upcoming year. My thinking was $1,000 a month to help us along, but I think that we were talking about possibly going through and opportunities for cutting, and I do see that as an opportunity as well. Although I think it would be useful to at least at the beginning have some layover and overlap.
You don't think that, I see Doug driving around all the time on a pretty regular basis. You don't think that he can do both of those in his regular
I think that he could. I think that he would prefer not to, and I would prefer that the town not do that. I just don't. I don't think that the work to do code enforcement requires the type of specialization that Doug has that would require us to pay him $100 an hour. That's my thinking on that.
and
Why it makes sense to hire somebody separately for it.
oh, I totally agree, but I just wonder whether that's something that can be cut out even in this coming year.
The building administrator portion. Is that what you're talking about? The line,
No, the code
oh,
enforcement,
code enforcement and just getting rid of it altogether?
just getting, yeah, that's something that I would myself consider. If since you're planning to bring someone in with a different skill set to replace Enrique, I don't know that that overlap is needed for the year. That's just my personal opinion, but obviously you know much better than I do.
May take a while to find that person though.
You might want to reduce it to 6,000 because you're probably not going to hire them on the 1st of July, you know?
Well, actually, weren't you talking about an overlap with Enrique? So you wanted to hire somebody in June?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, I would like to hire somebody in June to overlap with Enrique a little bit. But I think it would be useful to have some money set aside for code enforcement to allow for some transition into the role and to ensure that those duties don't fall by the wayside while somebody's getting their feet wet.
Do you have flexibility? I mean, do our contractors have year-long contracts that we have to sign, or how does that work?
Well, no, not at the moment. We do not have annual contracts with them. We have ongoing contracts.
So you have
But
flexibility.
We do have flexibility. All of our contracts, actually, Ron does write into them that the town has the ability to sever them.
I think that a lot of these good questions can be posed to Ron and brought back on March 23rd, because these are all really good questions. And whatever other questions people have should submit to Matt.
So Barbara, are you saying it might be good if Matt revised his job description for that person? For the, For-
You know, Matt knows better than I do for sure, you know, because he's there, but these are just things that came to mind for me. My concern is bringing someone in at a high level right from the get-go, when really what we're going to need initially is a third set of hands in the field. And because I don't think the town, at least as long as I've been on the council, we've always had 3 sets of hands in the field. And think about just putting up the tent. That's a 3-person job. Setting up for the holidays, everybody shows up. When we've had a storm, all 3 people show up. So in my mind, it's critical to have someone that's willing to, do the labor as well as the supervision. And I think that should be clear in the job description. That I think if you bring someone in as a director, that gets very confusing for the person. So I would bring I would bring someone in as a foreman, and then add duties, and as they learn, then make that person a manager. And then if they really are doing well, then they become a director. But that's just me. Matt obviously knows much better than I do. And then I wouldn't pay as much either. I just wouldn't. I would allow room for the person to succeed, and then reward them. But Matt, I mean, the question is whether you think two sets of hands is enough in the field,
Well, I mean, I think that I would just stress that I do still foresee a role for this person to be involved in that work. And I think that it's an opportunity with Enrique's retirement to reorganize and restructure some things to cover up some deficiencies that have existed for a few years now. And I think it is an interesting and sort of a strange confluence of jobs on the one hand, but I also think they do lend themselves towards one another. And I think that over time, our staff will be transitioning. And I even think about Doug in the building administrator role. And I know that he is not too far away from retirement himself. And so I think that it will continue to evolve and grow. And I think there is a chance for this person to grow into the role, as you say. And at that point, we might then say, you're moving up. You are in a purely supervisory role. Now you take on responsibilities of review of permits, and we'll hire another maintenance person. But that to me is a few years down the road. I think that there is an opportunity at this point to see and realize some efficiencies in staff and hiring.
Sounds like the right direction to go in to me.
Are there other observations on this personnel area?
Well, tell me the story of the part-time clerk and how that position is evolving over the next few years.
Sure. So, the immediate thing is that we're coming up towards the end of the budgeted money for the records retention office. And so that work won't be completed. That's in the short term. So there is going to still be a need for somebody to assist in that work. And hopefully the goal is to have a good system in place so that that's a pretty well-oiled machine, so to speak. However, I think that there is still an opportunity in the office for some of these clerk responsibilities to be passed on to somebody who's overseeing this records retention, because records retention is a continual process. And B, I see a number of other duties that could be taken on by this person. I think about the various committees that have been started in the town. Takes a lot of time to schedule them, to ensure that they're set up to open the meetings, to make sure that the minutes are posted, recordings are posted, and same thing with all the council minutes, meetings. We're going to hopefully get a new website. That takes work to maintain that. So I don't foresee it right now as a full-time need, but I do think that there are a number of sort of maintenance pieces of work within the office that somebody can seamlessly step into, especially if it's somebody who's assisting in something like records management, which familiarizes them with a lot of these things within the town. And so
I just
it would
wanna
be,
add I'm
sorry, go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
I was just gonna add one thing, that recall everyone when Donna Cawley made her presentation regarding the records and the value and the importance of establishing that it doesn't have, it's not, I don't think she said it's a full-time position, but I think she said that responsibility needs to be ongoing in the future. And we don't have that in the job descriptions of either one. So a part of what Matt's talking about was explained by Don in terms of the position that this part-time position he was talking about. Just to kind of refresh your memory.
And I do foresee it as a communications boost to town residents from the town office too. I look at our website and I see all of these things that need day-to-day or at least weekly updates in order to keep people up to date with what's happening. We have a calendar that's not working. We have minutes that are slow to post, recordings that are slow to post, committee members that are not always updated. It took us a long time to get the town journal out this year. I think there's a lot of projects that are related to just records and making sure that they're put in the right place and available for residents, that for somebody to come in a couple days a week would be a huge improvement, I think, for town services.
And might I add that, so we get many we pride ourselves in the fact that we are very responsive to people's inquiries. As you all know, with the amount of email that you get alone, Matt and Linda, the current staff, could spend all day just reading the intake. So there needs to be the second level of doing the research to respond. And it's really overwhelming, as you know, between all the different ways that people contact us now. Yeah. They contact us by phone, they contact us by text, they contact us through the website, hopefully through the website, and on and on. And then when we see them, when we have meeting, when there's with all these active committees, that generates inquiries and responsiveness too. And we're doing the job. We're getting inquiries, federal, state, county, and municipal, that we respond to.
So Matt,
all this mail stuff, we get US mail stuff. We should really say, well, call Jamie Raskin's office, but we don't do that. We follow up.
I think some of these.
Is the $26,000 in line 78, is that for someone to come in? Is that what you're saying, 2 days a week?
Yeah, I believe I got that by just saying basically $25 an hour, 20 hours a week is $26,000. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're currently paying for a records retention project specialist.
Mhm.
And so,
And
I
if,
thought-
is she staying busy? Is she working now 20 hours a week on records retention?
oh yeah, she's been, yes.
So how do you see adding all these other responsibilities into the 20 hours a week? Is that really what you need, or do you need more? What, is that going to help you at all?
Yeah, well, to Robin's earlier question and point is that this project will be, the point is to get this in a good place. And so there isn't a level of maintenance on it, but we're not dealing with 75 years worth of boxes from Mayor Bayer's house and going through them, and a lot of cool stuff in there, but that project itself is over. And so I think once you're able to pull back on, you know, I think of it, right now we're sort of digging ourselves out of a hole in records management, and eventually we'll dig and we'll get it out of that hole.
The project for all the past stuff will be over at the end of her, almost over the end of her contract.
And when is that?
Isn't it the end of, it's the end of this year, right? Or it's when the end of the money runs out, right, Matt?
Yeah, I foresee that ending probably in May at this point.
I could just make 2 points. In the other communities that I've talked with, who have gone through this records retention and filing, dealing with files projects, I think they all have contractors rather than staff doing it. And the second point I would like to make is that we didn't have a very good experience having part-time employees given our personnel manual. You weren't around for that, Matt, but it created some problems for us. And so I'm more comfortable with contractors than part-time employees.
I have to say, I'm remembering from the same historical reference that Marnie's speaking about, I wholeheartedly agree with her. I think it would be better to contract out.
But I have a question. Are we talking at this point about building our program the way Donna was talking? I mean, it sounded like a lot of the jobs that Matt wanted to be able to hand off to a new person involved like ongoing community projects like the minutes and the committees and things like that. Are we saying we want that person to be a contractor?
That's what I would be more comfortable with myself. Just remember Melissa, do you remember her, Franny?
Vaguely.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just in general, I think I'm in favor of finding one way or another, whether it's a part-time employee or a contractor, of finding a person who can continue this work on after Donna leaves without a huge gap in time, because I think we're just going to get back into trouble again. And I think that a lot of the stuff that Matt is talking about is the stuff that really sort of tanked our Rich's ability to perform his job. And people can disagree with me, but that would be my observation. And maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's certainly, Matt has given us a lot of good reasons to consider this. And maybe there's just a question of quibbling over whether we're having an employee or a contractor. But I think if the dollars seem about right to everybody, maybe we can move on. And, if Matt finds somebody and they say, I would prefer to be a contractor, then we just hire them as a contractor.
But for the purposes of the budget
Yeah.
session, it's just the dollars you're dealing with.
Yeah, that's what I think. I
Yeah,
mean,
the
it says
other
in your employee salary expenses an employee, but we could just as easily vote to move it into contractors if it turned out that the person we find is a contractor.
Well, I wouldn't leave it up to the person. I think it's up to Matt.
But he's gonna have to go find people and see what their professional setup is, whether they have their own.
I think
That's
he's
right.
thinking about
It's just
Donna.
that, but the point is that
I didn't get that impression.
the discussion now.
That's the impression I got.
These
Well,
are
let's
all
ask him.
important- these are all important issues which will be dealt with when the personnel manual that Ron is reviewing and the accompanying regulations, so to speak. But for the purpose of the budget, all you need to consider is the dollar amount.
Yeah,
And- But you're asking the right questions so you can assess the dollar amount. But you don't need to get into the minutia of these personnel specifics, because
I
that's.
agree.
Go into professional services rather than employees if,
But that's the kind of thing we can fix later.
Yeah, right. You can fix it later, but except the overall dollar amount is important. They can then be moved around.
I think it looks right to me and based on what Matt described, but I know we've had trouble finding people and hiring them, so maybe we don't end up spending that much in the first year anyway, if it turns out we can't find somebody.
I think they've got the person they want, Franny.
Matt, aren't you thinking about Donna?
Potentially.
I mean, you weren't going to post this position, were you?
Well, I haven't,
Maybe he wants to think about it.
I haven't gone as far down that road as I would like to before making a decision on that, in part because I wasn't sure if this was even a possibility, so.
I have to leave this meeting in about 5 minutes because I have to introduce somebody at the next meeting at 7. So
Shut down and we'll see each other again on the 23rd?
was there something else people want to go through in terms of the?
Just before we get off this page, did Tolberg give you all of his accounts for making this budget?
Yes,
Yay!
everybody is up to date.
Even Ron, is Ron up to date? Because he's the big one.
Ron's always up to date.
Uh-huh.
That's
Ron is
great.
like clockwork. I
surprised.
get it. It doesn't matter if it's Saturday or Sunday, the first of the month. I always get Ron's bill on time.
So
Well,
that's
that's-
unusual for
Does.
lawyers.
His wife does it, give her credit.
Yay, Mrs. Bolt.
Bolt, I should say Bolt Legal always sends their invoices in on time.
Yeah, and his wife also does a lot of the legal research.
Well, maybe the last question we should raise is, as people went through this, were there any big questions they had that Matt would need to do some research between now and the 23rd when our next meeting is? So we've got time to get that information.
I guess my question is, did the committees actually ever hand in their budgets? Because it looks like a bunch of zeros.
There were a number of committees that did not hand in budgets. But I guess I have a question, Franny.
Yeah.
Yesterday at the tennis committee, there may have been a couple of things that were not yet reflected in this budget that need to be added. Is that right? Because
There was one thing that they wanted some net replaced, but
okay, I thought there was the paving behind the,
well, they brought that up. They wanted to know how much it would cost to pave over the backboard. So, I mean, I don't know if we can get an estimate for that, but I did talk to them about that being part of the public park area. We would not be able to fence it off, in the same way and restrict access and everything. So people just were sort of generally interested in it, but I didn't get the sense that it was an urgent priority.
okay. And then
Carrie sent us her minutes. They mostly talked about the Pepco parking spaces and things, and their various different questions about their rules and guests and things like that.
one thing, not to harp on the tennis committee specifically, but right now we have $1,000 for the fountain in our budget this year.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that that's enough money to cover that expense. And so right now our budget reflects us spending that $1,000, but even just looking at the outside fountains themselves, I think because they had, well, what they wanted in an ideal world was a water fountain that could fill up water bottles, I think.
Yeah.
Those are
No.
$4,000 or so.
I think we moved away from that because there wasn't a good way to make it weatherproof. The solution that I think they want is a water fountain or water faucet that instead of putting your mouth down to it, they would have a curve in the neck so that you could hold a water bottle up in front of it and fill up a water bottle. Because most people bring their own water bottles. So they just wanted something like the sort of gooseneck shape of a faucet so that you could fill up a water bottle more easily.
Okay.
But I haven't been over there to look at it. So if you want me to come over and take a look at it, I can try to get over there.
Yeah, maybe if you don't mind, that would be great. Maybe we can take a look at it and I'll do some
Okay.
sort of preliminary research, and we might, when we look at our next iteration of the draft budget,
Okay,
shift that money
I'll call
to
you.
reflect that.
Okay. And just I know that we don't have a batting cage committee anymore, but we did get a request for a new net. I think that's a reasonable request. I mean, we don't want, balls going out into the street, and, it should be, we aren't using the machine anymore, so we don't have the revenue from the keys and everything like that, but we had talked about taking the machine and the shed down and out and just leaving up the nets for people to be able to use for throwing and hitting on their own on a tee. But that does mean that we need to have a good net. So I guess I'd like to see if we could put that in.
It probably should go in now, Franny, if
Right.
people are going to use it in the spring.
Yeah,
And
I
this-
mean, I don't think we have money in the batting cage right now, though. But if you think it's a small enough expense that we could do it without it being in the budget, then great.
I think we should look at that issue. I am going to leave the meeting, and I probably will see all of you in between, but otherwise it's the 23rd at 5.
Okay.
So,
Thank you, Marnie.
Bye.
everybody. Okay, are we all leaving, or is just Marnie
Yeah.
leaving?
Can we leave? I feel better having Marnie here. What do you think?
Well, it's 7:00, so
Yeah.
we decided to. So
Okay.
I think at this point, it was a very productive session. And remember to get all of your additional questions into Matt, and anything else, any other information you're going to need for the 23rd.
Okay, sounds
And
good.
I want to thank the council for their active participation, and of course, our distinguished budget committee for the incredible work they did.
And Matt.
Yes,
Oh,
and
yes, of course.
most of all, Matt, right?
No, most of all, Marnie, Robin, and the budget committee.
Yeah. So thanks, everyone, and we'll see
Thank
you all.
you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
see you
you.
in a little bit.
Bye.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye, everybody.
Bye.